Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like...
It's because we have a very special president.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, his core base is the evangelical fundamentalist Christian movement.
Which
Well,
is
the
crazy
fact-
because he's not even really a Christian.
Well, no, but I mean, you see how they justify it. You know, they'll say shit like,
it's ridiculous.
God works through an imperfect instrument and all this shit, and it's...
Have you seen the Pew results where like 30% of fundamentalist Christians believe he's the Antichrist but voted for him anyway?
No, I didn't see
Because
that.
they want him to bring about the end of the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my favorite journalist, Chris Hedges, did some deep undercover work with the Christian fundamentalist community. And his conclusions were that so many of these people, they come from a place of, these broken cities, in the heartland and just places of absolute despair and hopelessness. And they get sucked into these, like, cult-like, societies. And they really do hate the world that did this to them. That's one of, like, the core views in this journalist's perspective. And that the reason there's kind of like this fetishization of the apocalypse is because they want revenge on a world that abandoned them.
Depends on the sex. I was
sure.
I was raised as a Christian fundamentalist, unfortunately.
So was my girlfriend, actually. Yeah.
Oh, nice, yeah.
It's rough shit.
Yeah, it really is.
Congratulations on emerging.
Thank you. I still have a lot of baggage from it.
Yeah, you always will.
Yeah, it's crazy. Some of the stuff that they like try to brainwash you with as a child.
See, that's a whole different thing. It's like someone who's converted to it versus someone who's raised within it.
Yeah, being told when you're like 6 years old, oh, Satan's gonna come get you at night if you don't be good. Like that's just some like fucked up shit for a little kid to be like thinking.
Seriously,
it makes it hard to sleep.
No, seriously. I mean, my girlfriend, she's always telling me how it's like. I mean, she's come out of it too, and she largely doesn't believe any of this stuff, but it's still left all these imprints on her. Like even though she ostensibly and intellectually doesn't believe it anymore. There's still that fear of like hell and damnation and all of these vivid archetypical
sins,
concepts.
Like things that we've had drilled in our head as sin that we can logically realize aren't sin. Like
but there's still that internalization of the guilt and the shame and the judgment. And
well, and I think that's one of the... So, coming from a psychological standpoint, it's like there's like the content and the pattern like you and I were talking about the other day. It's just like there's... The content would be like, what is sin? Like, what are the things that are sin? And then the like pattern would be like the feelings and everything you get when you sin. So it's like I guess this would be kind of like a Jordan Peterson approach to it, but it's like there's like that self-criticism that's like infused in the sin. Where your premise is that there's like this almighty being that knows what's right, and then you did something that was against that thing that was right, and now you're gonna feel bad about it, or you're gonna... I mean, it goes to the point where it's not even feel bad, it's be so terrified you can't sleep kind of idea. Yeah. So, like, that would obviously, no psychologist ever would recommend that, No one would say that that's a good thing, I don't think. And so, like, but being able to try to remove the, like, negative aspects of that, of the sin, but then also keep this idea that there might be some things, like I feel like moral grounding itself is rooted in the fact that there might be some things that should make you feel bad, not in the way where you're hurting yourself or being hurt.
See, I think even though I don't come from a religious background, I do a lot of that shit. Mm-hmm. I have a very one of my biggest things internally, psychologically, is that I'm constantly hardcore judging and criticizing myself for any time I'm like violating my own principles. So at least my principles can change, as opposed to like when you're in a religious setting where they're given to you. But it's still, it's still very self-abusing.
Totally.
To kind of be that hardcore about
it. And I wonder, again, psychologically, that's a huge one for like behavior control. It's like that is kind of like negative. That would be like negative punishment, I guess. At that point, you are getting something, and it could be positive. It depends on how you're using, like what goal you're looking for. But it's like you've done something and you have a negative reaction to it, so don't do that thing anymore, right? And I
tend to just do it and just keep shitting on myself.
Yeah, sounds healthy.
Yeah, sounds really healthy.
When I become a psychologist, come see me.
I think you were a little too biased for me.
No. Just a little bit. No, but that's
best friend of more than a decade.
But I think the psychology community also definitely believes more in positive reinforcement.
Yeah,
so
sure.
really,
Which is funny because it's like, I know that in terms of like, you know, how you treat your dog. But it's like, but me, I'm gonna be a freaking tyrant.
But it's definitely interesting trying to find that balance within, you know, personal motivation.
Yeah.
It's like I have a problem with that as well, where like if I'm not hard enough on myself in a negative manner, then I tend to sort of relax and stop doing things that were really positive for me.
Right.
You know? But it's also, it obviously waxes into a very negative cycle where if you're just, you know, harping on yourself for not doing good enough or for not doing enough for the things that you want, you know, whatever thing, that can obviously turn into this negative cycle of just hating yourself. Which I think it's like, at least especially for me, it's very important to maintain like a healthy dose of you're doing fine, but you need to be doing a little better. Like keep moving forward. Like there's these things you need to work on, and so like trying to find that balance of like you fucking suck and like you're great is hard for me, because when I have those moments of you're great, it's like awesome. I'm gonna lay down, watch some TV, and then those moments where I'm like you fucking suck. I'm like, God damn it.
See, I do that too. I do that too, where it's almost like a bipolar thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love this idea intellectually, not that I've done enough work at actually applying it, but the whole idea of like treating that inner voice as like your inner parent, you know, and thinking like, how, if this voice was me parenting my child, what would I think about that? And be like, oh my God, I'm being a horrible parent. So, and trying to change that voice in a way where if it was your kid, you'd be like, solid, I'm doing good.
Well, and that's
a good way to think about it.
I like that. Like pulling away, like one step removed from yourself.
Yeah, because I think that's the biggest problem is we don't treat ourselves objectively.
Right.
You know, we have a hard time applying the same standards to ourselves that we do other people. Whether, you know, we're being too easy on ourselves or too hard on ourselves.
Certainly.
Well, and that's why I think that's like a lot of the time I advocate for like certain like community or environment like changes more than like internal changes, because I do think that like a mindfulness and a way of viewing things is really important. To be able to have that self-control, really, it comes down to that point of like being able to like in cognitive behavioral therapy, like a huge part is reframing. So being able to take a situation where that like those events happened, but you're also you are also seeing them in a certain light.
Exactly.
So one of the big things that they try to do is to create a different frame to look through, so that you can actually have like positive ways of like at least being able to let it go, not fixate on it. So, but like to me, it also I advocate for that, the inner parent thing, like being able to take that reframing on that cognitive aspect. But the one thing that I always worry about is that that can become a very good tool to not do actually anything externally. So like you have to be, or I guess not advocate for there being an overall environment change. So like behavior change and environment change are two different things. So you're using that in a way where you're like, I need to go work out. Like that's another behavior that you need to go. So you need to go to another environment where there's like whatever you need to work out. You can do it in your room if you wanted to.
Sure.
But so for me, one of the things is also like the importance of changing the environment to allow certain behaviors to occur, which I think that is such a huge point for like infrastructure doing society-based things. It's like, what behaviors do you want your environment to increase? You know?
So how do you differentiate the two? Because like to me, the individuals make up the community. So like in order to have a community change, you start at the individual level. So I'm kind of like, where do you see the
that's interesting.
environment?
Totally.
I'm a little bit more the other way, but that'll be interesting to get into.
For me, it's I mean, it's a layered thing. So like the idea, I guess, is like if we take into the consideration that like we see time as like a linear fashion, you have this idea that like there will be a certain time where people are developing, and I'm just using this example because it is like a lot of people's way of looking at the world already. But it's like you, as a child, you have very little control over your life. Like almost everyone can do something to you to make you do something, right? So that is like a point at which you don't have that's like no personal effect on that. That's all environment.
Limited agency.
Yeah, exactly. Limited agency for sure. So the idea though is that kind of limited agency can occur almost I would say infinitely. It's just that the outside controls change. So the environment changes. So we like to house that in like if you do like a scientific worldview, you can go look at like, well, what are the laws of physics? What are the laws of the biosphere? Because those are limiting me. I have no control over those things. But what I can do is, taking that as my rule set, I will work within those things to change my behavior, right?
Okay.
So, but one of the things that I think we forget about as like people sometimes, I guess this is more like an intuit, I haven't thought about it like enough to really say whether or not this is true, but it's like we forget that what we can also do is make a lot of community oriented like places that will influence people's behavior. So like why you go to school to learn, that whole idea of like the university of like, why is it that if you go to a few buildings that are all like centered on certain things where there's like a philosophy going on, like there's the people just come there to show up and like speak words at you, now you'll learn. But maybe in your off life, you know, or in your like free life, you don't do that there.
Right.
Why is that you're productive at work,
but
you're not productive at
it's a
home?
self-discipline issue. Because a lot of people,
Well-
because I've like learned from home for like my whole life, so like I can study at home really
Yeah.
easily. But like a lot of people can't take online classes. So
Totally.
like nobody knows that I didn't do my
Right,
work.
which I will, so
And-
for, oh yeah, please, no,
He was
I was just going to say that also you probably have set up your office in such a way that facilitates that to a certain
yeah, that's
degree.
important.
And
And know your
yeah,
habits and everything.
So it's
There's
still
a lot
an
that goes
environment
into
Yeah,
it.
too.
and there's lots of things
To
that
an
can
extent.
influence
To
it,
an
you
extent.
know,
To an
which is
extent.
it's like Jordan Peterson's advocating for cleaning your room. You know, that sort of gets you in the mindset that everything's
Right.
in order and I'm going to do these things. And on a more societal level, you know, you can start to make places that somewhat influence people to be more like that.
Exactly.
And you're not necessarily trying to take the most conscientious, self-disciplined person and make them do the things that they're already doing more.
Mm-hmm.
You're more trying to get those people that are, more environmentally focused to sort of, direct in a certain way.
Well, and I do think it varies. I mean, you have people who are very individually grounded, you know, they've seized mental control over their life, you know, and they refuse to let the environment really impact them, or at least as much as they can.
Right.
They're trying to seize control of their, you know, their behavior and all of that.
There's definitely a scale of people,
Yeah.
like environment to individualism.
And
like
I
how much
think
impact
it has a lot to do with kind of your circumstances. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, they're just trying to make enough to get by, and they have all these external responsibilities, and a lot of times they don't feel like they have room to take control.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of like necessitous men are not free men. The presence of necessity overtakes, your ability to exert your free will, in a sense. You know, and I agree with that in the sense that the more you're having to deal with things that have to be done, the less you can exert your free will over what you'd like to do. So just kind of the idea of like, our societies, the structures that we create around us are an environment. It's no different than being in the jungle, as a hunter-gatherer, or, like Drew was saying, the idea of the biosphere as a whole. It's, you create an environment, and to a certain extent, you're going to have to adapt to the needs of that environment. And so if we think about that and try to create an environment that facilitates certain ways of life over others, in ways to make it easier for certain things, I think that's really important.
Yeah. I just wanted to jump in with one little. I have a couple, these aren't necessarily perfect examples, but I think a good example is having more recycling bins available.
Right.
That's something that easily facilitates a behavior that most people in the society say is positive. And we've noticed it's pretty easy to see that, say you have a trash can every, 100 yards, and you have recycling bins every 500 yards on a
There's going to be less recycling.
There's less recycling.
Yeah.
People just throw their recycling in the trash because it's not immediately available.
Yeah.
And a sort of a slightly different, maybe more psychological aspect. People have done some research and unfortunately I don't know who did the research, but there's been research done about playing classical music in public areas, and it's shown that violent crime will go down in those areas.
That's
from
amazing.
Just having classical music being played.
See, and I feel like this brings up a wider conversation, which is in what areas is it more effective to try and influence individual behavior or change environmental factors, because I think it's going to differ from situation to situation.
No, and I totally agree. One of the things that I thought that would be a really good illustration of that is I never think that you shouldn't be able to have a space where you go to and then be able to do whatever the fuck you want. You should have a home, basically, is that idea where it's you get a lot. You don't have to need anything if you've gotten everything that you need, obviously.
It's interesting, parallel to that, though. So, at the home level, too, the environment's a big issue. And, thinking about, impoverished communities, right? The environment, that they're stuck in an environment where
that state of necessity.
Yeah. And they don't even necessarily have an idea of how to get out of it.
Well, and I think one of the things that I want to, make clear is that it's not as though wealthier people don't have necessities, but that they are so able to fulfill those necessities that they just that they don't even think about them.
A lot of them are kind of necessities of choice. You know what I mean? It's not like you're gonna die if you don't make a good business move.
I'm just saying you could die if you don't eat.
I mean, that's true.
True. So but I think having the needs of a business owner is different than being a poor father,
at the poverty line, where
and being being I need to feed my children tonight.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I am trying to ground it in actual needs. So there are the psychological needs those are more difficult.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so Maslow is pretty good for that. That's
certainly a good way to think about it.
Yeah, I think so.
I know that it doesn't technically work that way, but
but the only reason why I'm I guess stressing the fact that there are the needs is because I think if we actually are able to agree on that, on the fact that, saying everyone needs to eat, we still don't really even say that because there's starvation that's occurring and stuff like that. But the idea would be everyone needs to eat. How do we make that the best thing? How do we make that the most sustainable, most economical, most I guess effective system for good behaviors. So it's if we all say that health is also a need, right? To be healthy is also a need. It's there are plenty of people who would say that that's not a need. You need to be in a healthy weight. It's there's a lot of people who would say, well, we don't even know what a healthy weight is. And it's it's obviously way bigger than what we portray as magazine covers of beautiful women or beautiful men. There's obviously a way bigger dynamic between that. But also if we say that you're 600 pounds, we're pretty sure that's not good,
life,
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. But yet we still don't have any kind of real regulations on food, right? And so there's this weird dichotomy between freedom and then good systemization towards things that we actually do need. I feel there's a lot of needs
this is tough because I feel you can go overboard really quickly because it's
well, they need
on
to be
one hand
well.
it's you don't want to make it so people can't go eat shitty food.
No,
because that's gonna get really dark really quickly.
Right.
But you want to make it so there are economically and conveniently available forms of healthy living.
Yeah.
That should be a thing.
I'm not saying that this is easy, and I'm not saying that it doesn't need to be really nuanced.
See, but we're getting into the whole environment versus individual thing again, because it's for a lot of people, buying a quick, easy, shitty meal is all they really have time or money or knowledge for.
So the shitty part isn't necessary. The quick and easy and cheap,
it's
that
a
is.
dopamine spike. They're not buying the food for nutrition, they're buying it for the it's like a drug.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what I'm saying...
And people, the more desperate people's situations, the more prone they are to getting addicted to those kinds of things.
I agree, but if we don't say that there is also an economic effect on that, I think that that's not reasonable.
What economic
effect? The cost to society from that is massive, just from the health side.
Well,
the medical costs and the interpersonal
who create those kind of foods. I get that there's a sugar, there is you can train your tongue to be able to be sensitive to the point where you don't need to eat a whole pint or more, a whole gallon of ice cream.
Sure. That's true that you can, but the issue is that it's way easier to prey upon pre-existing programming from thousands of years of having fat, salt, and sugar be really hard to
I agree, but again, that's a prey thing.
Yeah.
People, that's not, to me, that's not an ethical thing. They're not trying to make the system as good as possible.
Right.
They are trying
that's a really core part of our economic system.
Yeah.
You know?
But profit over morality.
But do you see how that whole idea divorces it from the environment and benefiting either the individual or
completely. I mean, if we wanted to loop it back again to climate change, I mean, next to fossil fuels, the next biggest impact is animal agriculture.
Yeah.
And then a huge part of that is, you know, the fast food industry. It's a big chunk of that market.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in my opinion, what's going on in that area, like looking back at history, where we look at back, like
it's going to be disgusting in the history books one day.
Barbaric thing is like, how the hell did people think this was okay?
It's practically like industrial torture, and then feeding people the meat of these creatures that have just been in these like mechanical torture machines.
Pump full of antibiotics. That way we fuck up our freaking antibiotic.
Dude, we're gonna have all these antibiotic resistant bugs because of it. I think something like 60% of our antibiotics are used on animal agriculture.
Yeah,
and so you have them in
chlamydia just discovered recently.
And so you have like these like cesspools.
Gonorrhea. It was gonorrhea.
Oh, okay. Well, you have like these cesspools of like these just absolutely repulsive conditions, and then you're just flooding that with antibiotics, and all this bacteria is like, ooh, that's evolved. Like, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
According to a new report, this is from Sustainable Table. Sorry, that's weird for me to read for some reason. SustainableTable.org says, according to a new study by the FDA, approximately 80% of all antibiotics used in the United States are fed to farm animals.
Damn.
Yeah, so if you look at that, I mean, like,
so my brain thought 80 was too insane and 60.
I mean, this could just be a new thing too. It might change.
Maybe it went up 20%.
I mean, holy fuck.